Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Think Small podcast. I'm your host, Denise Steinbring, and today's conversation starts with a question most people have never thought about. When you or someone you love has a cardiac device implanted, or a deep brain stimulator, or a neuro device that changes someone's quality of life, who actually built that thing? Most people assume the company whose name is on the box designed and manufactured everything. Often they didn't. Often there's another company, a specialized engineering and manufacturing partner that does the actual work. That company almost never gets the credit, and my guest today leads one of those best companies. Matt Hanks is the CEO of Valentia Medical, a contract development and manufacturing organization based in Richmond, Texas, that specializes in active implantable medical devices, cardiac management, neuromodulation, deep brain stimulation, all the toys. The company has grown at over 40% compounded annually since its founding in 2012, earned a spot on the Inc. 5000 4 years in a row. That's an amazing feat. And recently received $15 million in additional growth capital. Matt came to Valentia after 36 years in manufacturing at GE, United Technologies, and Paragon Medical. He became CEO in December of 2024, and his first act was to help launch the company's new brand and a bold, inspirational promise in the CDMO space. Matt, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the Think Small podcast.
Thank you, Denise. Pleasure to be with you.
Can you maybe explain a little bit more about what is a CDMO? I try to give a little background there, but you guys really do partner with a lot of the big brand name medical device companies, right? But it's a real special relationship because these are devices that save patients' lives.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, for those people who don't know what a CDMO is, from a manufacturing perspective, I might ask what planet you've been living on for the last 30 years, but it's a concept that's fairly ubiquitous across industry. I mean, OEMs are increasingly focused on doing what they're good at, and so as a CDMO or a contract development and manufacturing organization, what we get paid to do is have all the expertise to do the stuff that they're not focused on. So we do contract research and development, we do contract manufacturing, we do contract automated test systems, and we do contract cybersecurity.
Okay, thank you for that. And before we get into a little bit more about Valentia Medical and the work you're doing there, I want the listeners to understand the career that built up to this. So, like I said, 36 years in manufacturing. Walk us through that journey and what it taught you that maybe you couldn't have learned any other way, especially surviving through COVID.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's hard to believe it's my 36th year. I started on the shop floor and in, really at the ground level in manufacturing. So the first 10 years or so of my career were spent, in smaller manufacturing businesses doing broad roles, including greenfielding a facility in Mexico, and heavy program management load for large OEM customers. But it wasn't long. I think my first leadership role was in 1997, so that does date me a bit. But I would say that just generally speaking, your CEO role is typically somebody that comes from a sales and marketing track. And while I have, had a marketing role at GE and I have had, lots of heavy customer engagement, I think fundamentally how I got to this role, some advantages. And one of those advantages is really just always staying focused on, how does what I'm doing right now impact the customer, right? And so I have a deep operations background. I think that really allows me to lead the organization forward in some of our key growth areas, which are very operationally focused, like manufacturing. And I would say that, being part of larger organizations like GE and UTC has given me a great appreciation for the diversity of people and thinking and cultures that it takes to build a robust and thriving organization. So I think I would answer it those two ways.
Okay. Well, a lot of CEOs kind of fall into two camps, right? You're either very operationally focused, and so you're great at the day-to-day, making things run like a well-oiled machine, or you're the visionary and you need other people to be that operations, right wingman, if you will. Where do you see yourself in that spectrum, and who do you have to play the other role if you lean more towards one or the other?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. There's science and art in every role, and I think when you're leading an organization, you can't lose sight of that. You've got to be wing to wing, nose to tail, as we like to say at Valentia Medical. And so I think I'm probably equal parts creative and operationally driven. I know what to expect from the operations side of the business, and I've had enough, customer exposure, program leadership, marketing exposure that I can help set the vision for that side of the business. We recently onboarded a new chief commercial officer at this business, reflective of the growth that we've enjoyed and that we're thankful for, and also a reflection of where we're headed in the future. And that individual is Nate Porter. And so he joined us in February, and Nate really fills. I think he really fills that partnership role with me, where Nate always has the sense of what the market sees and how we're going to position ourselves for a high level of service. Because as a CDMO, the entire game is how you service your customers. So I'm excited about Nate's partnership, and I think Nate and I together will really round each other out as we move forward here together.
That's great. Well, you spent most of your career as an operations leader, and you weren't the founder of Valentium. You came in as COO, and within a few months were named as CEO of a company built over 12 years by a founder whose name and relationships are woven into every client conversation. Most operators who step into that role spend the first 2 years just trying not to break what was built. What does it actually feel like to be that person? How do you lead a culture that someone else created? And I'm looking at your background here that has some really cool word on it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a very fair question. I will say that most of my career over the last 15, 20 years has been with larger organizations. And a key consideration I had when joining Valentium in 2024 was what was the degree of alignment between my values and how I operate personally and the complexion of this company and its culture. And it was really uncanny. Dan Purvis is our former CEO, currently chairman and co-founder of the business, along with Tim Carroll, both people who are still vitally engaged in the organization and the business. But I think they were looking for an opportunity to expand the executive capacity of the business in a way that positioned us for changing more lives for a better world going forward. And it was really uncanny for me. The cultural alignment between what values drive me and the values that drive this organization were, just like I say, uncannily aligned. And so just to wax on that a little bit, I mean, we don't have a mission, we have a passion, which is changing lives for a better world. This informs everything we do. It's really the foundational motivator, or the why we're here. And our values are immutable and they will be permanent for this business, and they very closely align with the values that I've operated on over the course of my career. You can see them on the wall behind me. Honorable, results plus plus, and humble charisma. And so honorable means doing the right thing for right's sake. Results plus plus means doing the job and then some. And humble charisma is simply our brand on being the kind of people that you'd like to be around. And so when you put that passion and those values together, if they're operational and they're really part of the fabric of the organization, and they're the criteria by which you hire, inspire, then they're living. And so it really resonated with me, and it's been a real, I think, just seamless transition for us because they do. So it's been intentional, and it's been a lot of fun in the almost 2 years since I've been there.
Yeah. And, you've seen a lot of different cultures throughout the course of your career. I think a lot of people talk about culture, but really getting people to live that every day.
That's right.
Intentionality, right?
Yeah.
And you had said something to me on our prep call that stuck with me. You said, our lips and feet move in the same direction almost every day. But you said almost. So what does it look when they don't? How do you rein somebody in that's going rogue, right? That isn't reflecting the culture that you want people to show up with every day. And it might not be in this company. It might have been something you learned in a previous life.
Well, there's a lot of learning for anybody that's working to shape an organization made of people, because people are, you know, they're not like machines, right? They have feelings and motivations and fears and interests. And so I think anybody leading a group of people has to, become an expert of people primarily, in order to be able to lead from the front. But yeah, I think you've hit on a couple of things that we focus on. We we have I think a culture that tries to prioritize these values, and that's a part of the way we make them the fabric of our work. And so I'll just say, we recognize that not everybody that's a great engineer or a great operator is going to have charisma, right? Sometimes they'll have humility, but they may not be entirely charismatic. And so we can, you know, these are we can negotiate on a little bit of this. Results plus plus. We like to say that we do the job and then some, but sometimes we fall short. And I think that's just human. It's the nature of the complex and incredibly difficult work that we do. Engineering happens, and we own it every time. We will always run to the fight when it comes time. Um, close gaps between expectations and performance. And so results plus plus doesn't happen perfectly every day. But the one thing that we're not ever going to negotiate on is the honorable value, and that is doing the right thing for its own purpose. Doing right for right's sake is what we like to say, and that is non-negotiable. That's a deep, deep part of our culture, and that means that in the times where we fall short on results plus plus, or you know, we may not be exuding the humble charisma value of being the kind of people you want to be around. We understand like what our North Star is, and it's really that honorable value.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's also important to really understand how employees like to be recognized, right? Because not everybody wants the humble charisma award.
Yeah,
They might prefer just a thank you from their manager behind closed doors because they don't like the spotlight on them. So that's a lesson I've learned in my career, is really get to know your employees and what they value and then reward them as such.
that is so absolutely true. If you're working at Valentia Medical, you're going to get used to getting embarrassed with recognition. It's just the nature of the way that we work, and maybe I'll share a little bit of that with you. So we have at our in our rewards and recognition process, we give out values and behavior every day, which are centered around our three values, and that's every Wednesday. We celebrate those values, and it's peer to peer recognition. So that's the foundational layer of our reward and recognition process, and then monthly we are rewarding impact awards, people that are really pushing the needle on these values. And then that's got a cash, there's a cash component to that. And then quarterly, we do a CEO award, and I get to pick from those impact award winners, I get to pick somebody that gets recognized on a quarterly basis in our all hands. And then that's got a little bit more of a cash component to it. And I think our HRM, Lisa G, has just done a great job putting this program together, and getting it operationalized is what makes the difference. It's not about having a program; it's about what that program does for us,
Yeah.
right? So yeah. So folks are pretty comfortable with getting a little bit red in the face and a little bit embarrassed, but it really does bring the team together.
Yeah, that's great. And I love the intentionality behind that because it's an environment that people want to work in, right?
Yeah.
Love to be peer recognized. I think that was the key that stuck with me. What you said is that somebody else has noticed. It's not necessarily leadership, right? But one of your peers. I think that goes a long way.
That's so true. That's so true.
Well, let's pivot to some of the new work you've done. You recently rebranded as Valentia Medical and introduced a new aspirational promise. 100% on time, 100% on quality, 100% of the time. And that's a bold claim in an industry where CDMOs are famous for project slippage, budget creep, etc. And so you said something on our prep call that I think was one of the most honest things I've heard from a CEO. You said, trust is our only proprietary product. All the product we make is somebody else's IP. Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you said it the way I would say it, but it's absolutely true. Um, we're a CDMO. All of the intellectual property that we operate the business on is somebody else's, and so we have a duty to take care of that, and that requires trust. And so, on top of our foundational layer, our passion, changing lives for a better world, our values, honorable, humble charisma, results plus plus. On top of that, we've built a behavioral model that results in trust if you follow the process. So this may be a little bit more where my operations background comes into play, but I'll tell you that as a person who spent most of his career not being the sharpest knife in the drawer or the smartest person around the table, I will tell you that I having things that are easy to follow works for me. And so we have developed a behavioral model that if you follow it, it results in trust. And if you're really curious about it, I'll walk you through it real quick.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, it starts with respect for the work because we're in a performance-based culture. Okay, respect for the work and respect for the worker, the person doing the work. Okay, you have to have that foundational layer of respect in order to do anything. Work with a customer, get a project done. That's the basis for our behavioral model. Next is open and honest communication. We've all had experiences where you've had open and honest communication that's not necessarily productive, and it's the reason why it hasn't been is because of that absence of respect. So respect for the work, for the worker, open and honest communication. The next step in our behavioral model is setting and maintaining shared expectations, not dictates, not discussion, but dialogue, setting and maintaining, okay, shared expectations. And so our recipe for trust is performance over time to shared expectations. And if we can follow that model in our work, in the way we approach our lives, our relationships with our customers, then at least you have a methodology for when something breaks down, you can revert back to the prior step. So at the top of that is trust. And as we like to say, that's really our only proprietary product, and it's something that we're working on getting better at all the time. I think it's more important that you are directionally correct and you've got a good rate of progress than going to the market and saying we're awesome, come pick us.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, because honorable means you got to be honest too.
Right.
So we have adopted an aspirational goal that we call our customer promise, which is 100% on quality, 100% on time, 100% of the time. Okay, that's a very aspirational goal, and so I will tell you that there are times we don't meet it, and so I think that the key is shifting an organization from fear and blame to learning. What can we learn from the times when we fall short? And how can we recycle that back into doing a better job next time? And I think if you can get that sort of cycle of learning and growth and get an organization to abandon duck and cover, fear, blamesmanship, you're going to be building an organization that's scalable and can touch its customer in a way that's genuine. And that's really what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, sounds like you've built just an amazing culture there. It reminds me a little bit of the military, right? They do nameless, rankless debriefing, like the Air Force when they fly sorties and whatnot, right? And it doesn't matter if you're the general, you're the first one up to say, here's where I let you down to the team because it allows people to be open and honest.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, our version of that is you check your title and your tenure at the door.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we sit down to solve a problem, there is no title, there is no tenure. It's just all of us versus the problem. And hopefully our customers feel that.
Yeah. How do you measure that trust with your customer base? Is it NPS scores? Do you have a customer experience guru in the company? Because if this is your proprietary product, you got to be measuring it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think, in terms of where we've come from, where we're going, and where we're at today, our metrics are in a state of motion. And so we're in the process of building those together as a team. But we're focused on NPS, and I think we'll probably adopt an NPS type metric at some point in the future. I think what we're really focused on developmentally this year is where do we check in and how do we objectively, to the degree that we can, how do we objectively measure progress to expectations through the course of executing a program.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, the medtech boneyard is full of a lot of companies that got FDA clearance and then couldn't cross the reimbursement chasm.
Mm-hmm.
For any startup founders in the medtech space who might be listening, who's at that exact moment right now, clearance in hand, no CPT code, maybe no commercial strategy, what's the first thing they should do to make sure that they're set up for success?
I think you have to. The first thing you need to do is start from a perspective of minimum viability. I think oftentimes as we start building and scoping requirements for a product, it just ends up getting festooned with all kinds of bells and whistles. And I think so. If you're an innovator, a CEO of a clinical stage company, staying focused on minimally viable product is something that we've learned from our repeat experiences with customers that really helps guide toward a clear path toward reimbursability. So I think that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing is I would say um, consult with the experts. If this is your first time targeting the reimbursement code, there are organizations in the market who are very cost effective to use, and they're going to solve a lot of the ambiguity for you. Um, to give a little bit of a shout out to one of our partners, Walnut Hill Medical, is somebody that we often recommend to customers to navigate the complex environment of getting a reimbursement code. And so I think consult the experts and make sure you're focused from a product perspective on minimally viable product. And you can always develop it later once you get cash flow. But so often, I think a lot of those bells and whistles end up tripping people up with the FDA and with the reimbursement process.
Are you often speaking with the commercialization team in some of your OEM customers to really understand how are they going to launch it? What claims do they want to make? What does the design need to be in order that we can make those claims, right? This is a highly regulated environment, so you have to be careful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, I mean, we do not consult for commercial viability with our customers. We trust that they're doing that. We have a lot of experts in this business that have been around for 30 plus years in med device, including a lot of OEM experience. So most of our people that are touching our customers have been on both sides of the table.
Oh.
But no, we're really focused on, we really start product and end user requirements. That's really as close as we get to the commercial side. And we have a human factors engineering practice at this business, along with 8 other engineering practices to really give our customers full scope. And so we are engaged in that HFE work as well. But our closest contact point to that comes in really in the form of requirements management, and making sure that those requirements are consistently and bidirectionally traced through the project work breakdown process and our execution of the program.
Yeah, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's something I want to spend a little time on because you shared something with me that was fascinating. I don't think any other CDMO your size has built, and that, is a significant undertaking for you. So you have a formal medical device cybersecurity practice, a university partnership with Colorado Boulder, 3 online courses for the whole medtech industry, and an independent business around cybersecurity training as a new revenue stream. What was the thinking of behind being that generous with something that could be a real competitive moat for you?
Yeah, I think we anticipated the evolving increased cybersecurity compliance requirements that businesses are going to face. And if you think the way we do, we're trying to figure out how we can add more value for the industry at large. certainly, there's a profit motivation there, but as we've discussed previously, our core motivator is changing lives for a better world. And I think there's no time in human history when cybersecurity has not been so critical. With the connectedness of everything and these increasing the evolving threat environment. So I think it was very intentional. That decision to have a cybersecurity business predates me. Um, but I can tell you that we consider it a vital part of our business. And I'll just say, when I took the CEO role, we organized the business into four distinct P&Ls. And we did that because every one of these P&Ls touches the customer in a unique and differentiating way. And so cybersecurity is a business. They're very closely related. And a lot of times our cyber team will provide product security services on a program that we're doing, on an R&D basis. But it also stands on its own. And it does because it's a very vital service that we provide to industry. I think it fits really well with our culture. And our cybersecurity business is led by Garrett Schumacher, and he's probably one of the best cybersecurity leaders in the industry today. And that's reflected in the growth of our cybersecurity business, which is growing at substantial double digits this year. So it's a central way we talk about the business, and we're increasing our marketing focus on cybersecurity. But I'll just plug all four of our P&Ls real quick. Product research and development, manufacturing, cybersecurity, and also automated test systems. We're the recognized market leader for medical device automated test, and so it's a real vital business, and every one of these P&Ls is a piece of the puzzle as we reach the market.
Yeah. And so beyond your generosity of wanting to educate the market on cybersecurity, right, the FDA has become more stringent with a lot of new regulations. So you must have seen an unmet need, or you must have seen some of your customers making mistakes that caused you to say, hey, I think there could be a real business here. What types of mistakes do maybe emerging companies make because they haven't really thought about cybersecurity as part of their product development process?
Yeah, well, I think we think of cybersecurity. We really have two ways to touch the market in cyber. One is in clinical stage product development, pre-market, if you will, and then the other way is in post-market surveillance and monitoring. I think one way that companies can get tripped up on cybersecurity is that they look at it as a paperwork exercise to generate artifacts for their 510K or PMA submission. And while artifact generation is, a necessity for our cybersecurity business, and we have, over 400 submissions, successful submissions to the FDA under our belt at this point. The quality of the work that underpins the artifacts is really what differentiates us. And we have an enormously smart cybersecurity team. Sometimes they talk about things that I have a hard time understanding. But I think just making sure that on a pre-market basis that you're actually doing quality work is something that the FDA is looking for. And on the post-market side, I think you have to maintain a constant awareness of the threat environment. Like Garrett Schumacher, our cyber P&L leader, is constantly educating himself as a lifelong learner as to the threat environment and how we're structuring our post-market surveillance, testing, and threat vector assessment, all of these kinds of things that I barely understand. So I think I would highlight sort of those elements as how a clinical stage or a startup company can be focused for success.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Tailwind, maybe for you, right, is this whole movement towards reshoring. And, we've had tariffs and supply chain fragility and national security concerns, right? These are all pushing medtech manufacturing back towards domestic production. So what does that mean for you? Is this a tailwind or is it more complexity? Because also, if you're not prepared for that, it's a good problem, but a bad problem at the same time.
Yeah, no, that's true. Well, I think we can certainly say since COVID, global supply chains have certainly been challenged. Um, I think that's the new normal, to be honest. And so, what worked 25 years ago, when I was at GE, GE couldn't get to China fast enough. I mean, everything was moving offshore, and the issue of a long and multi-segment, complicated supply chain wasn't a primary concern because the labor arbitrage was so compelling. But I think in today's environment, um, you know, for companies who are in our industry, um, that labor arbitrage is less of a concern unless you're making a commodity scale product. But for the highly engineered stuff we do, our business is set up around short, tight, responsive supply chains, where we manage our strategic supplier relationships very closely. And we have formal processes about how we assess lead time and its impact on our agility to respond to customers. But I like to tell folks from a cost perspective, especially since this last couple of years, I like to welcome folks to the low cost region of Houston, Texas, and and people laugh when I say that, but it's actually true. We're in a really interesting part of the world where there's great capability. The tax environment is really advantageous. The access to qualified labor is really great, and costs are pretty low, relative to other parts of the country. So yeah, I think it's a great time to be in American manufacturing. And we do have some tailwind, but at the end of the day, cost is a critical component, but it's how you operate the supply chain and how you operate internally that really makes a difference. Folks are done with 40 to 52-week lead times and long, snaky supply chains, and you can't ship a 40-foot container from China for $2,500 anymore. It's expensive and delayed. So I think we've had this global experiment where having these long supply chains at one point in time was sort of the flavor of the year, but I think there's a lot more rationality in the way businesses are operating today, and they understand that being close to their end markets is super critical.
Yeah.
And so, we're in a great spot for that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, here's my last question. You have an amazing background. You've done some really innovative things in your early days there as CEO. But for some of our listeners who are building something right now under real pressure, maybe it's they got private equity for the first time, maybe it's market pressure, or maybe just the pressure of knowing their company depends on them to show up every day. What's the piece of wisdom you would leave them with?
That's a really open-ended question. Well, I would say, Denise, I think you've got to look at your business in a way that you are assuring that you're only doing what your customer will pay for. Okay, and subordinating everything else in that business to that idea, and teaching your people to think and ask the question: how is what I'm doing right now impacting the customer? Would the customer pay for me to do this or not? And I think what you'll find is that there's often a hidden process, especially in FDA regulated med device manufacturing, right? I mean, we have a tremendous documentation and compliance requirement that goes along with the business. And the customer's paying for all of that. But the way we do it matters, right? The way we do it in an efficient way matters. So I think I would just say that's number one, is only do what the customer will pay for and figure out how to get rid of all the rest. I think the other thing, and I don't mean to sound really, touchy feely or squishy, but it's hard to believe. This is my 36th year, and I've picked something up that I think is relevant, and I'll share it with you here. The underpinning idea of this business and the teams that I've been a part of, even if we never said it, is love. And I think Norman Vincent Peale was the guy that said, like, you're going to love, maybe it was Harvey McKay. I'm an old guy, so I can use those names. But it's like, love your customer, love your people, love your business and the greatness. And we all know what that feels like, and it's fun to be part of. So My personal opinion is that there's only three things that really motivate a human being: love, fear, and greed. Fear is a terrible motivator, and people don't like to work under that. And greed will only motivate people for so long. But if you can genuinely make contact with their love for what they're doing every day, love for the customer, I mean, good golly, we spend 10, 12 hours a day with each other around here. If I'm lucky, I get 2 to 3 hours at night with my loved ones. So this has to matter. And I think baking love as a motivator in your organization, not in a squishy way, but in an active way that people can feel. I think that's a recipe for success, regardless of what business you're in.
Yeah, what a great, I would call that a mindset shift, right?
Mindset.
You got to have the right skill set, but you got to have the right mindset as well. I love that. Matt, this has been one of the most honest and human conversations I've had on this show. For our listeners who want to learn more about Valentia Medical or your regulatory resource that you mentioned, or to connect with you, where should they go?
Yeah, they can go to valentiamedical.com and click on next step at valentiamedical.com, or they can reach out to me directly, matt.hanks at valentiamedical.com, and I'll make sure that you get steered in the right direction.
That's great. And to our Think Small listeners, if today's conversation made you think differently about what it means to build trust as a product, or reminded you that the work that you do for your customers is ultimately a love story, share it with somebody who needs to hear this. We'll see you all next time. Thanks so much for being here, Matt. I really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you, Denise.
Bye.
Great to talk with you today. Thanks. Bye now.
Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?